Right, here's Jim in Arlington, Virginia. Hello, Jim.
Hi, how you doing tonight?
Doing well.
Hey, Jim.
Yeah, I understand your concerns, over making sure we're restraining spending and everything, but I mean, I really feel the reality is that the recession, all the state help that has been needed, that is now expiring, the Bush tax cuts. I mean, that is a big reason for the deficits we have, and it's not all. I mean, can you name any Obama programs that have been unfunded so far? And it's not health care. I know that.
Well, pretty much everything, if you count the things that we don't actually pay for, that we put on the national debt. But I'll defer to Grover. I don't know. In fact, I can't think of a single thing that we are paying for.
No, certainly the $800 billion stimulus package was completely unpaid for. It was all done with borrowed money. The president said he would never do that. In his debates with McCain, he said he'd never spend a single penny more than we are spending now on any program unless there was a dollar restraint in spending elsewhere. And as soon as he came in, the first thing he did was allowed Pelosi and Reid to throw $800 billion into the center of the table to be divvied up. And that was just the beginning. Ever since then, it's been more of the same.
Yeah.
And they increased spending, domestic discretionary spending, the one everybody says you can't cut. They increased that by $1 trillion over the decade starting when he came in.
And we are paying $1 trillion more in taxes. We're not paying for it.
So no, it was all unpaid for.
Unfortunately, that's a fault that does not stop at the feet of Barack Obama. That's something that we love to do in this country. We love the free lunch. Let our kids pay for it. Here's Jesse in New York. Hello, Jesse.
Hello, Jim. Thanks for having me on.
Sure.
Grover, I wanted to ask you, you stand for capitalism, for deregulation, for unfettered free markets, for low tax rates for corporations, and for tax cuts for the rich, as well as spending cuts that will reduce the standard of living for everyone else. I wanted to ask you, are you trying to drown the government in the bathtub or the working class?
And what exactly is that supposed to mean, Jesse? Or do you have any actual serious question here?
Well, the serious question is that under the Clinton administration, the rich paid a higher tax percentage, and we created 23 million jobs. Under the Bush administration, we had the worst job creation record since Herbert Hoover, while creating massive deficits. So what I'm asking is, do we really think that lowering tax rates is going to create anything other than it already has? Massive unemployment and high deficits?
Sure. Well, you do an interesting thing there. You talk about the Clinton years versus the Bush years. And I would encourage everyone, when you think about this, to understand presidents have the veto. The House and the Senate pass tax bills, and they pass spending bills. And it's very important to get a better understanding of what's happening politically. Take a look at who runs Congress first and who runs the presidency. There were 8 years under Clinton, and then we'll get to Bush. The first 2 years, you had a Democratic House, Democratic Senate, House, Senate, President, all Democrat, first 2 years. Stock market didn't move, unemployment didn't move, employment didn't move. Then the last 6 years, once the Republicans captured the House and Senate, you had a tremendous jump in employment, stock market, and GDP, also because they cut the capital gains tax. So the 8 years of Clinton were actually 2 years of united Democratic government and 6 years of divided government.
All right, now then, I want to be able to finish that argument cogently, so we will take a break and be back with the next part after these. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show. We're talking to Grover Norquist, the president and founder of the group Americans for Tax Reform, online at atr.org, and we had a challenge to you regarding the relative merits of job creation and economic expansion under Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush. And you were noting that, in fact, these presidencies can be divided into several categories. You were talking about President Clinton in starting with the period when he had Democratic control of both houses of Congress. But go ahead.
Sure. With Clinton, first 2 years, Democrats ran the House-Senate presidency. The last 6 years, the Republicans had the House and the Senate. The last 6 years, you had growth. First 2 years, you didn't. So there was a difference, and it was Republican tax and spending policies that did well. Under Bush, the first 2 years, remember, for 18 months of that, the Democrats had control of the Senate, and you had September 11th. But most important, from 2003 to 2007, you had united Republican government with the Republican House, Senate, and presidency, unlike the first 2 years. During that period, you had strong economic growth, and the Republicans cut the capital gains tax, they cut individual rates, and they cut taxes on businesses. In the last 2 years where the Democrats took the House and the Senate, Bush was still president. That's when the economic collapse happened. That's when the stock market went down. That's when unemployment went up. You really have a difference. Watch Congress. Congress matters, and that's why things have begun to get a little bit better with the Republican House, but won't really turn around until the Senate changes as well.
1-866-50-JIMBO. Carl in Riva, Maryland. Okay. Good evening, Carl.
Hey, good evening, Jim. I had a question for Grover regarding corporate tax reform. Currently corporations offshore about $100 billion in tax revenue that we don't see here every year thanks to the existence of corporate tax loopholes that exist. I know Grover talks a lot about lowering the corporate tax rate, although how can you lower corporate tax rate for companies that already pay effectively 0%? And wouldn't it just make more sense to do like Reagan and Bush Sr. and Clinton did, close those loopholes and make that extra revenue back?
I think you're raising a couple points that some of the listeners may not be aware of. Most countries in the world, except the United States, as a matter of fact, all countries in the world, other than the United States, have a territorial tax system. So in France taxes all business activity in France. If a French person or a French company invests in the United States, we in the United States tax that business, but France doesn't. We have a worldwide tax system in the United States, which may have made some sense when we were the only economy in the world. And that is, if an American goes overseas and makes a living, France taxes you and the United States taxes you. If you're an American company in France, France taxes you and the United States taxes you. Now, to reduce the punishment of being an American company dealing internationally, what the United States says is, look, here's what we'll do. We won't add taxes, American taxes, to what you earn in France or Ireland or Saudi Arabia until you bring the money back. When you bring it back, it gets hit by as much as a 35% corporate tax rate, the highest tax rate in the world. European average is 25, the United States is 35. Dumber than France is not where you want to be, but it is where we are. So I certainly believe that what we should do, and most economists and folks looking at this say, we ought to become a territorial tax system like the rest of the world so that when an American company earns money overseas, it can bring it back tax-free. There's $1 trillion sitting overseas. You'll hear something called repatriation discussed. I think it's likely to be part of this budget deal, by the way, which would allow American companies who have earned $1 trillion overseas to bring it back and not be punished for bringing it back.
Now, you only pay a 5% tax rate instead of a 35% effective tax rate and avoid paying their fair share. When I pay 5% instead of 35%, they call it tax evasion. But for some reason, if I'm a corporation, that's called repatriation. Why not just make them pay their fair share like you and I do and bring that extra money back and use that to hire back some of these teachers and some of these workers who've been laid off in this recession?
Well, this is one of the things that the Obama administration did want to do at the beginning of the administration was to impose the United States 35% tax rate on companies even when they earn money overseas. Again, the rest of the world doesn't do this. There's a reason why the rest of the world doesn't do this. It would be devastating to American companies, and the reason why American companies have been purchased by foreign companies is simply by being owned by a Belgian firm rather than an American firm. A worldwide company actually does better.
I'm much more concerned personally about protecting companies that create jobs here than I am about companies that feel they got a better deal overseas, and so they throw a ton of people out of work here and a few people collecting dividends do just fine, and people who are actually working don't. I'm not really that concerned about how those companies do. If they want to go away, then go away. But I'm interested in companies that create jobs here. And, yeah, that's with the American workforce, and it's a higher labor wage. And, yes, maybe there are some actual standards here on the kind of world in which we live. Not all regulations are bad. We wouldn't want to live in Eastern Europe when the Soviets were running things there. It was an environmental hellhole. But, nonetheless, those are the companies I'm worried about, are the ones that create jobs here.
But that's a function of how we treat companies here. And to suggest that Eastern Europe was somehow less regulated than the United States is
no, but it was environmentally it wasn't. I'm simply saying some regulations are not such a bad thing.
Well,
they weren't regulated at all.
They were completely They were owned by the government. They were completely regulated.
But the point of it is, in terms of what you were allowed to do, they were allowed to dump sewage into kids' cereal bowls virtually. It was the worst environment, I guess, that has ever existed on the planet, Eastern Europe, after the Soviets.
I went to Harvard, and I was taught that under socialism there wasn't any pollution, but perhaps they fibbed to me.
Well, they fibbed to you a whole lot, obviously.
Okay, just checking.
Obviously.
Look, if you want to create, and I hope we do want to create jobs in the United States, we need the most pro-growth atmosphere here, both for companies based in the United States and for companies overseas. A lot of the rest of the world invests their money in the United States. That's how we became rich. We didn't become rich because we had a lot of money to invest here. Britain built our railroads for us because it was the place to invest in the United States 100, 200 years ago. And we need to take a look at our tort laws and what we do to chase people overseas. You know, we've got a lot of some of the best governance in the world in the United States in some areas. That's why we're richer than other countries. We have had lower taxes over time. We've had less stupid regulations over time. But our tort laws, where trial lawyers can sue people who spill hot drinks on their laps and sue McDonald's, that costs billions of dollars in the United States and kills a bunch of jobs.
Right. But we have mainly an extension beyond common sense of those rules. You can take any good idea and you can pervert it. And clearly, the trial lawyers in this country have perverted that idea.
Right. But that's an area where in the U.S. it is more damaging for job creation than in other countries. In many ways, we have more productive workers. We have less stupid regulations. We have more secure property rights than many other countries. But there are some things we do here that chase jobs away. And we need to go down that list and stop doing those things.
1-866-50-JIMBO to Mike in Falls Church, Virginia. Hello.
Good evening. I was reading Rick Perlstein's Nixonland. It was just a fantastic history book about the Nixon era. And back in the 60s when they were creating the Great Society program, rats were a problem in tenements, and children were dying from rat infestations to different diseases and all the rest. And you had small government conservatives, even back then, ridiculing it as a civil rights bill. Well, out of that Great Society, we ended up with Medicare, and of course, Social Security survived it as well. I'm wondering, I think Grover's most famous quote was, he'd like to shrink government till it was small enough to drown in a bathtub. Under your vision, is there enough government to provide for health care for old people, or to keep them from eating cat food, or to exterminate rats if kids are dying from them? Or isn't that the function of the federal government?
Well, I think we want to have a government that protects the country from foreign invasion or attack. I think we want to have people's rights protected. One of the challenges we have is that the government has gotten involved in so many things beyond which the list of things that are, let's say, mentioned in the Constitution or that are the proper goal of the central government or even of state and local governments, that it's become awfully expensive. And government does a number of things which have been destructive of human happiness and human liberty. A lot of people used to believe that welfare was helping poor people as a result of welfare reform, which you remember passed during the Clinton years. He vetoed it twice, signed it on the third time.
And took credit for it after that.
Yes, and it was his idea afterwards. But the folks on the left said that 1 to 2 million American children would be on the streets starving to death because we weren't providing welfare for free forever. And in point of fact, about 40% of the welfare rolls, people moved off of welfare, got jobs, went into the job market. People who were on welfare were better off than before. It was a tremendous step in the right direction, and everyone on the left said, we can't live without this government program. They were wrong. Welfare, as structured before, locked people into dependency, destroyed lives, destroyed families, and destroyed neighborhoods. So I think, yes, we need to take a look at government. I'm not sure that the present sugar subsidies, which double the price of sugar in the United States compared to the rest of the world, and obviously hurt poor people more than they do the Rockefellers and Kennedys of the world, I'm not sure that's a government service. I think it's the government being unhelpful and unkind and destructive. When the government used to regulate the price of trucking in this country and increase the cost of shipping things in this country by about $90 billion a year, raising the price of everything because the government set the prices for trucking. We did that for almost 100 years in this country. 100 years of destructive, stupid, more expensive stuff. I think we need to take a look at those things the government's doing that make us poorer and less well off and stop doing those things.
1-866-50-JIMBO is our number. GEICO has been saving people money on car insurance for over 70 years. See how much you could save online at geico.com or over the phone at 1-800-947-AUTO. We'll be back here at Westwood One.